We are back, everyone. Welcome. This is WoW Killer. No, we didn't pod fade. You pod faded. We didn't pod fade. I'm Garrett Weinzerl, here as always with Taliesin, who is now
Hello!
a
Welcome
father.
to WoW Killer! I'm back. We're back. WoW Killer's back with a vengeance and a havoc because we can tank when we need to.
What is our vengeance being carried out against? A lack of WoW podcasting?
Each other mostly,
Okay,
and
so
WoW in general.
Okay, gotcha. I mean, there's a lot of vengeance going on. There's, I just came out of the most WoW heavy Hearthstone reveal ever. Illidan is just burned in my brain right now. So I'm just thinking of vengeance and being prepared and really just being an emo edgelord constantly. So
just a normal Wednesday then?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, just nothing new here at all. Just once again, considering we're in a blindfold.
You're finally back, willing to record this podcast after I was sat here for you for 2 weeks waiting for you to come back.
Really sorry onto the scene,
so that we could record the podcast. I gave birth to a child myself physically with my own body, and I was still here ready to podcast, and I was all like, "Oh, Garrett, I was phoning you every day." Like, Garrett, let's do the podcast today. And you were like, no, you need some time with your child. And we won't do it this way. I was like, but I want to. I don't want to spend time with my child. He's boring. He can't do anything. He's got tiny fingers. He can't play WoW.
He's such a bad tank.
I know. He's awful. I tried, but he's terrible. Do you know what? I held him up to the keyboard and I was like, and this son is World of Warcraft. And you know what he did?
Throw up on the keyboard?
Pooed himself.
Oh, he pooed himself.
He pooed himself. That's all he ever does. He's stupid. He's an idiot. He can't even wipe his own bum. I have to do it for him.
Could have went either way, and that's the way it went. I mean, when you can't
it went all ways, Garrett. It went in every direction conceivable. It was like the great worm from beyond.
See, this is a mistake. What you do is you hold him up and say, this son is the number 4, and it's bound to consecrate, and you're a paladin, and that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. And you got yourself a tank. You did it wrong.
It's true. I should have done that. I live and learn. I'll try it next. I'll try it again when he's 4.
Nice. Yeah. Well, today, Taliesin, we've been talking about doing this one for a bit, and now it does seem as if it is the right time because we are now at the end of Battle for Azeroth. The final patch has been out for quite a while, and the final wing of LFR has been released. So it is time for our BFA Postmortem that we've been talking about doing for a while. It's time to look back at BFA as a complete expansion.
Yeah, the final bit of content for BFA is now out there with that release of the Waking Dream, the N'Zoth fight on LFR. There's basically no one who plays this game now who cannot go and see every bit of content that there is.
Oh, I thought you were going to stop after no one plays this game right now.
Yeah.
That would have been a great joke.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And now it's not funny at all because this delivery did not land.
I'm so sorry. Did I ruin that? See, people say that we're a good podcasting combo, but we prove them wrong every week. We're not even trying to prove them wrong. It just happens.
It just happens like that. But yeah, I mean, what better way to celebrate the final little piece of BFA coming out than going all the way back to the beginning and...
Oh, yes, please. Can we? Let's do it all again. Let's go round again. Well, it's true, Garrett, that for a lot of people, just as a preface to this, BFA will not be the best remembered expansion. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think that is fair to say, while at the same time desperately wanting to make it clear that I have enjoyed a lot about this expansion, and yet I think it's still my second least favorite expansion, overall.
Wow. That's not a great ranking. What's your least favorite expansion?
It's Warlords, because of course it is.
BFA is not as good as Warlords. I read that on the forums, on the internet.
Well, Well, here's the thing. Those are opinions, and it's okay to have different ones.
No. That's not what I read. As it happens, obviously I agree with you. Well, yeah, so I think there is value in going back. It's something we've been talking about on our stream a lot recently as well. There's sort of merits of different parts of BFA. And I think there is value. Someone asked me the other day, are you a patch player or are you an expansion player? And it was a really good question. It's one that I actually had to kind of stop and think about for a little bit. And I came to the conclusion that I am essentially an expansion player rather than a patch player.
I mean, what is the difference between that and just saying you are a WoW player? You're just
now that's fair enough, and maybe I should have been that smart ass in my reply, but I took the question seriously as it was asked to me, Garrett. And I thought about it.
I'm legitimately curious what the difference is.
And obviously, I am a WoW player, and you know, it's very rare if I'm playing an expansion that I will skip my expansion in the middle skip my subscription in the middle of an expansion. In fact, it's only happened once when I quit playing in Cataclysm. And since I came back the first time, I've been back for reals, though, for good. And so I'd have to say that I'm an expansion player. But also the way I think about expansions, I think about them in terms of an expansion rather than on a patch-by-patch basis. Because this is something that we'll definitely touch on properly throughout our in-depth discussion. But I think, and people are going to have a natural averse reaction to this statement, I think, but I'd like to kind of explore it as we go through. I think on a patch-by-patch basis, BFA in many ways stands up with the best expansions. I think it stands with Legion. If you compare on a patch-by-patch basis, you'd be like, well, it's hard to see why people don't like BFA. But taken as a whole, it can be a very different story, and there's lots of different things that kind of contribute to that. I'd have to say that I am an expansion player.
Yes.
Which makes me perfect for this conversation.
Fantastic, because I've been a bit of a patch player this expansion.
There we are.
And also, I think just in kind of my post-hardcore raiding WoW life, which has kind of been basically since Pandaria, I think I've been more of a patch player, because that was when I kind of shifted into general Blizzard gamer, where I just kind of realized I liked almost all Blizzard games, and I wanted to play all of them fairly regularly. And I kind of, post Lich King, I kind of got away from WoW being the only game. So that's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought about that, but that is, I can see the divide between those types of players. But yeah, let's go back. I wanted to, we kind of broke this up into some topics, and I figured we should probably start by just talking about the launch, and how that went, and kind of try and remember how it felt at the time. Because I really can't think, frankly, to be fair, I can't think of a single WoW launch that I didn't enjoy. And I probably would have had some issues with Burning Crusade had I actually been ready to go through the Dark Portal right away and realized that it was a broken mess and they made a horrible mistake by forcing everyone into the exact same zone. But that was not my experience. And my Wrath of Lich King launch experience was pretty damn good. And every other launch experience has been pretty good. And BFA was no exception. I really enjoyed the launch of this expansion. I started.
When you say launch, Garrett, are you including the build-up and the pre-patch in that?
Yeah. I wasn't really thinking about it in my head, but yes, now that you've mentioned it, yes, and I did.
Because I think that's an important part. I think that's an important part of it. And I think, for example, Warlords of Draenor's pre-patch was really terrible and didn't have the best kind of build-up for the expansion. And the fact that because so much important plot leading into the expansion was delivered through a novel, it was quite a confusing situation that we were kind of thrown into when Warlords of Draenor started from a narrative point of view and from a lore perspective. And I feel like the build up to BFA was, maybe it's because the channel was a thing and it hadn't been for the launch of any other expansion, so I was more in the middle of it and everything, but it felt like the build up to BFA was full of genuine excitement. One of the reasons for that is because this pre-patch that we knew that was coming with the War of Thorns and the Battle for Lordaeron, which had been kind of essentially teased in the trailer for Battle for Azeroth, and this question that had been kind of hanging over the player base and anyone who followed the story since the expansion reveal at BlizzCon, the images of Teldrassil burning and the silhouette of Sylvanas sort of there, and this promise that it was going to be a much more narrative-focused expansion. and that they'd be telling the story in a different way, which, for better or worse, I feel like the pre-patch did kind of bear out. You know, it was a very different pre-patch experience to any other expansion that we'd had. Played out over 3 weeks with you know, missions and storylines, and some of which found its way into the game as a starting experience later on. But it was very different 3 weeks in that pre-patch, which I felt like there was like genuine hope and hype and kind of, you know, like a TV cliffhanger style desire to know what was happening in the story to the BFA pre-patch, which hadn't been a case for any expansion launch that I could remember before that.
I agree, and honestly, listening to you kind of go through the War of Thorns and trying to, you know, recalling my own thoughts about it, I think it's like a perfect allegory for my overall thoughts of BFA in general, which is that I took great grievance with some very specific things in the War of Thorns, and yet thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, and was still like emotionally bought into most of what was going on story-wise, even if a couple of things stuck out to me and made me nerd rage.
And they did, Garrett. I remember.
Oh, they did.
And well, one day we'll get around to making that podcast as well.
Sylvanas
we'll get
its own episode.
Yeah, but I mean, for me as a player and who is someone very interested in you know, who was coming from a point of view of, I think most of us when a new expansion launches, of wanting it to be very good, you know, and you know, just willing it to be very good, because, you know, who doesn't want the new expansion that you've just bought to be good? Whoever wants a game to be bad? I remember thinking, with the storytelling and the way that story was presented in the pre-patch, thinking that it was a genuine step up in terms of any previous expansion. And I remember being like filled with kind of hope as a result of that and optimism for the expansion. The other thing about the pre-patch, which will count as a launch thing, I guess, was War Mode, which I maintain is one of the best things ever introduced into World of Warcraft. Are you a War Mode player yourself? I
fell off whenever the hell they did that patch that just made Alliance Maraud. Forgetting what? Oh God, what was the change? It was when they added they
added against overwhelming odds, because there was apparently a lack of Alliance players going into War Mode.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, if there's like any non-current WoW players listening to this podcast, War Mode is a toggle, which is like a difficult toggle to turn on and off. In fairness, you have to be in either Stormwind or Orgrimmar. It's not just any old rest area, but to turn on your War Mode. And what it basically means is there's now no such thing as PvP servers or PvE servers. You can make the decision to be PvP enabled or not. And you will only be phased with people who have made the same choice as you. What that means is people who played their entire WoW career on non-PvP servers, like me, I was on a PvE RP server, but, you know, occasionally just had that hankering, you know, and that kind of longing for world PvP, because, you know, there's something very, very exciting about that, especially in an expansion which promised to be, you know, focused around the Horde and Alliance faction war. And, you know, I remember kind of thinking, oh, do I want to start a whole new character on a new PvP server? Do I want to be stuck on a PvP server if I don't like it? It allowed loads more people to experience world PvP and being on a PvP server. And I think it's amazing. I think it's brilliant. I turned on War Mode on the first day it released, and I haven't turned it off since. But you are a pussy and you did turn it off.
Oh, 100%, because they ruined it. But
yes, then apparently not enough Alliance players were using War Mode. So what they did was Blizzard in like 8.1 or 8.15, they introduced against overwhelming odds, which is it was the faction that was underrepresented in war mode, depending on how much they were underrepresented for, they got a special quest. They got an increase in their war mode bonus, because when you have war mode noble enabled, you get a flat 10% bonus on various like questing rewards and experience and things like that, to make up for the fact that you sometimes die while fighting people, and that takes longer to play the game. But those rewards were increased for the faction that were underrepresented in war mode. I believe even today, Alliance receive 30% extra rewards for having war mode enabled, whereas Hordes still are just on 10%. Gives you some idea of the imbalance there. But they introduced a quest whereby if you as Alliance, and it's always been Alliance that got this quest, went and killed 25 Hordes, you got some really good rewards. So for a couple of weeks after that change happened, there were armies of Alliance players forming raids and just running into Zuldazar, killing everyone in Atal Dazar. And it was impossible to kind of do any mission table missions or go to island expeditions, because that part of the docks was completely under siege. Rather fittingly, actually, since that was the patch that the Battle for Dazara Lore raid happened as well. Personally, from a lore point of view, I thought it fitted very well. There were and because it was the Battle for Dazara Lore raid that was happening that patch as well, there were loads and loads of Horde soldier NPCs standing around, getting ready for war. It was the troops getting ready for war, and it looked really cool, but none of them reacted to any Alliance players at all. It was hilarious. You had these armies of Alliance players running through the docks, slaughtering every player they could see, and Horde players, poor 120s and everything below as well, just running around getting absolutely massacred by these huge Alliance armies, and these huge beefy NPC orcs with the spikiest PvP armor just standing there, not even flinching, not even moving, doing absolutely nothing, watching the carnage unfold like the lifeless husks they are.
And me in the corner, hearthing to Orgrimmar to turn this shit off. I gave it a good 3-day try, an honest 3 days. I distinctly remember going out to Vol'dun all 3 days for world quests, and no one wanted to band together to try and fight the Alliance back. Everyone was just bitching. That was all they were doing. Everyone just whining in all caps. And I was just like, all right, I hate this. And I just turned war mode off, and I never turned it back on, except on all of my alts, which I leveled with war mode on. Because why wouldn't you? It's speed.
Of course.
The XP is phenomenal. And also all my alts afterwards were Alliance. So... yeah, it worked in my favor.
I have to say that the fact that I can log on now onto an Alliance character and still have that 30% boost, let me just check actually, means that you are in the minority there, Garrett. You are in the minority. Because obviously lots of Horde players didn't turn their war mode off, absolute cowards. Yeah. They obviously kept it on because there clearly is a massive imbalance. Otherwise, 25% is that now. So not so bad. But you were in the minority of people that ran away screaming from war mode. Has to be said. For me, I think it's the best thing ever in the entire game. I love it.
I really liked it.
And Darkshore, the War of Thorns, the week that war mode was introduced was the first week in Darkshore for the first week of the War of Thorns, which was when canonically the Battle of Darkshore was kind of happening. Came to a climax the next week with the burning of Teldrassil. But again, thematically, it was amazing, because suddenly, if you turned on war mode, there was mass world PvP happening.
That one I like a lot better because the NPCs were getting involved. They would attack you, and the Zarlar one, watching rows of 80 orc soldiers not do anything kind of took me out. But I really did enjoy war mode up until that point, and it was literally just 3 days of I can't get anything done was the problem for me. Up until that point, I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
So does that mean you never experienced it in Nazjatar?
I never experienced it in Nazjatar, no.
World PvP in Nazjatar is legit. It's brilliant because the Horde base and the Alliance base are very close together, and there's essentially just one path that connects them. So it's quite often that you will find just huge groups of Horde and Alliance just fighting on this path. And it's brilliant. It's old school. It's wonderful. It's thematic. And I remember when that was happening in Darkshore, I was like, wow, they have found a way to tell this story in Darkshore and put the Horde and Alliance together in a way that the players are doing what in the story they are supposed to be doing, just off their own backs, just for the lols and just for the fun. And I thought that was like such an elegant piece of game design and such a beautifully realized kind of thing. That again, it was one of the reasons that I thought the build up to BFA and the pre-patch for it was just phenomenal, and one of the reasons my excitement levels were so high for it.
I think it's telling that the Alliance player loves this and the Horde player is a little grumpy about it.
Hey man, I've got like 6 Horde 120s. Don't give me that. I've got my Alliance Slayer title. I love that.
There's a lot left up to your personal social experience with it.
They all bleed the same color. When I gank them, they all bleed the same.
Yes. Numbers over their heads.
They all give the same amount of honor. I'm not fussy. I don't care.
Mileage may vary. Your mileage may vary.
The thing is, right, so BFA was also the expansion where, partly inspired by the beautiful roly-poly hippo mount for PvP, the Vicious Saddle mount for Season 1, Alliance only, the Horde got a really cool one as well. It was not as cool as the Horde, as the hippo. I was really inspired to do Arena, and to actually get a PvP ranking and to actually earn that mount, which I'd never done before. PvP was a part of the game that I stayed away from and that I shied away from and that I had no interest in at all. And I think the introduction of War Mode and just getting a bit more used to actually just fighting people in the world and the buttons that it required and the kind of things you had to do, and realizing that, you know, it was doable and it was possible and that it could be good fun. That's one of the ways that I kind of got into doing arenas and opened up an entire part of the game that I'd not only never been bothered with, but assumed that I would never, ever be bothered with, because I was kind of a little bit, you know, intimidated by it, really. And War Mode, it kind of worked as like the way LFR got me into a raiding eventually, because it helped take away some of the kind of intimidating aspects of it. And it probably helped as my first step into arenas and getting Vicious War Saddles, which I never thought I'd ever get, which is amazing.
I enjoyed watching your journey through that, because I still do not. I still am just not into Arena. It's just never been my thing. But I honestly have never really been into small scale PvP in any game that I can think of.
Fair.
I like just from a thematic standpoint in PvP, I like a little bit more scale to everything that's going on. I like to introduce a little more chaos into my PvP.
Fair enough.
So like this one is one of them. Like, no, I don't think Arena is bad. It's just not for me. Kind of thing. I did a lot of it in BC. That was like my Arena expansion. Because I just
you were a teenage edgelord in BC.
Oh, you're damn right I was. Oh yeah, I literally had like blue black dyed hair. That's what we were doing. We were listening to My Chemical Romance, and really nothing has changed except my hair's blonde, and I'm listening to My Chemical Romance.
I had bleached pink hair when I was 17.
Oh, please dig that photo up.
I was so skate punk, you have no idea.
Oh, that's great. Now look at you with your sweater over your collared shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. They tried to throw me out of school for it, and I said it was part of my religion, and I had to write a big essay on how it was part of my religion. So
what?
I was that kind of smart ass. I was that kind of dickhead. I was that kind of person that you just didn't want to know.
Sounds like we were
but
really
the thing
was,
my bleached pink hair was like my passport photo then for 10 years. So every time that I had to go and show my passport to someone, when I was then like 25, 26, 27, I'd hand over, and looking like an actual human being, I'd hand over this passport with a photo of my kind of like bleached pink hair, like bright pink, like some collarless shirt with like buttons down the middle and like a choker. And just like, wow. We all do stuff when we're 17, right? Yeah.
Actually, the choker is my bridge too far. I'm like, wow, you really went for it. You went for it, Tally.
Yeah,
that's nuts. Yeah, I have nothing else to add on the arena front other than, frankly, I am with you. The hippo mount is one of the coolest mounts they've added in the game.
I think it's the best mount in any game ever. I love it. And made even better by the fact that it's A, alliance specific, so only like 50% of the player base can even get it, and B, time limited and locked behind the vicious war saddle. So like it's a genuine achievement to have it as well. And people, if you've got it, people know why you've got it. And that's what you ask for in mounts, really. That's like the most attractive thing about any mount, is that you can ride it and people know instantly like where you got it from and why you have it, and they can feel jealous about it, on top of the fact that it's a perfectly round hippo.
The last thing I want to mention for launch is just the leveling experience, because for me,
I mean, the actual launch itself, quite aside from the leveling, it's worth mentioning how smoothly the launch went, because don't forget that the launch for BFA was a worldwide launch, and it launched worldwide at the same time, and that's the first time that had happened for WoW, or maybe even any Blizzard game, but certainly for WoW. And it was a really big deal. So you had people entering this game in NA at the same time that people in the EU were entering it, and that was unprecedented. That was unheard of. And it was, again, added to this sense of real excitement. I remember me and my guild, it meant that for us in this country, because we're an hour behind the rest of the EU, for them it was midnight, but for UK people, it opened up at 11 p.m., which is like a really good time for a new expansion to launch. So we were in Silithus waiting for the portal to open to, I think it was the Chamber of the Heart is where the first mission happened or something. And so we were lining up in Silithus, and there were hundreds of people in Silithus getting ready to go into this portal. And they were obviously separating out into their guilds. And so you had like, blocks of different guilds and their colors with their banners and stuff waiting to go into this portal. And of course, we're on an RP server as well, and our phases are bigger than phases for non-RP servers. So there were that many more people around, like slightly different rules for RP servers. You should play on an RP server. There's no reason not to play on an RP server. Everyone should play on an RP server. It's just better. And it was just like a genuinely exciting moment, like more so partly because of the worldwide launch, partly because of how good the pre-patch had been and like what an event the pre-patch had been. It wasn't just like, Legion's pre-patch was brilliant, but it was just repeatable scenarios, it was really cool, but it didn't like build to a crescendo. There wasn't like a narrative through line to it or anything like that. Whereas, the BFA one, it had been genuine storytelling, and it had built to a point that had led us here.
Wait, do you mean to tell me that a really cool and well-executed narrative is cooler than me parking my warlock at Torren Mill to power level him exclusively through Legion invasions?
I'm saying there are good and bad parts of both.
I actually rather enjoy. There's nothing I like more than feeling like I'm cheating the system and leveling faster than I should. So
and that was a super fun thing about the Legion pre-patch, and it was one of the things that I thought I was going to miss from the BFA pre-patch. But actually, that kind of repeatable content was in the BFA pre-patch because of War Mode and because of the battles that were happening at Darkshore, which surprised me and delighted me, and was one of the reasons I liked it so much. But the actual start of BFA was great. There was I know there were a couple of servers that kind of descended into a buggy mess. I think, I don't know, there's one particular UK server that kind of basically melted down. I think it was Draenor. And Draenor, unfortunately, is one of the ones that a lot of content creators play on. So you had a lot of content creators being like, the launch of BFA was a buggy mess. It was terrible. But for anyone else, it wasn't. It was like, just like Legion before, it was a super smooth launch. Like, unimaginable sort of 5-10 years ago.
Worst expansion, worst server. What do you expect?
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's what happens when you play on a server named after the worst expansion.
It's almost as if
Garrett had spoken.
It's almost like your mileage may vary in all aspects of World of Warcraft, and everyone's experience isn't exactly the same.
Yeah, almost. It's almost like when you try to speak for the whole player base, you're doomed to fail. I don't know. Who knows?
My launch experience was super smooth as well. I also remember going out to Silithus and there just being the most players I remember seeing in the same place in a very long time. And I just love that. That's when I get so stoked on World of Warcraft. Yeah. The launch of anything new, when everyone just rushes to the same location and the servers don't go down. It's always really rad to see.
Oh, it's magical. And don't forget, you're coming off the back of Legion, which was a universally loved expansion.
Yeah.
And you know, there was every reason to believe that BFA was going to be brilliant. And we were in Silithus by the big massive sword that had been put there at the end of Legion, and it just felt great. It was super exciting. But sorry, then the leveling experience. What was your experience of that? When you
I would like to get into it, because I remember, you know, I can go into it from talking about the Legion feeling, because I was looking forward towards BFA, really excited, but also apprehensive, because I was still Horde main, and I knew I was going to level Horde first, and I was actually worried because I was more excited about what I knew was coming on the Alliance side of things. I'm a big Jaina fanboy, and also I love nautical themes. It's an aesthetic I very, very much like. I love Pirates of the Caribbean. Grew up in Florida. I spent a lot of time around saltwater. I like boats. a lot, Taliesin, to put it as a 5-year-old would. And so I remember really looking forward to BFA, but knowing that I was going to max on Horde first and thinking to myself, oh, lore-wise, aesthetic-wise, capital city-wise, I kind of would rather be Alliance right now. Also, darn, they just burnt my starting zone. When I first started playing World of Warcraft, the first thing I ever rolled was a Night Elf, and I stayed on that Night Elf until midway through Wrath of the Lich King. That's when I switched to Horde. And it was really tugging on my heartstrings, knowing that Darnassus and Teldrassil had just been burned down. And so coming into BFA and still being like, no, I want to play with my friends and my raid group. I'm going to go Horde. I was really pleasantly surprised. I loved the Horde leveling experience in BFA. I still don't, Zuldazar is still a pain in the butt to get around. Even now that I have flying, it's still a pain in the butt to get around. I will admit that, but it's still a really cool city. It's a cool design. But the Horde zones blew my mind. I really, really took to leveling through it. And there's something about, I always say this, there's something about cresting a hill in World of Warcraft and seeing something new. And the hill cresting in BFA, 10 out of 10, would hill crest again.
Seriously, and I feel like there was a specific intention with the design of the zones in BFA, and you see that most obviously and kind of explicitly in the Alliance zones in Kultiras, but it's definitely present in the Horde zones as well, of like a realism, like a very intentional realism that won't be there in Shadowlands, because we have high concept kind of island zones essentially in Shadowlands. They're not connected sort of geographically in the same way that the 3 zones of Kultiras are, or the 3 zones of Zandalar are, and the way that they flowed into each other beautifully, and there were
very curious about transitions in Shadowlands and how they're going to play it. Because
that's one of my big fears, genuinely, because like the satisfaction that I took, and you're absolutely right about the cresting the hills. There was a moment leveling in Kultiras, and I knew I was going to love Kultiras because I'm just like you. I grew up by the sea. I grew up on the coast. Like my parents' house is literally 10 yards away from the coast. And it's really important to me. It's boats are a huge part of my upbringing, and I always had a soft spot for Jaina and for Kultiras as a result, and to see it being finally realized was kind of like, and knowing that N'Zoth was there as well, and that it was eventually going to end up as an old god thing, because that was, it wasn't a surprise. Like we knew that at the beginning of the expansion, even though I still think they could have benefited from making it more explicit and just making it more official. But that was like my dream expansion aesthetic, and they really kind of went to town on the realism of it. And there's a bit in Borealis when I ran out of the city through the docks, and that transition of city into just the outskirts of the city was so beautiful. And I took a quest and I ran up a hill, and as I got to the top of the hill, I was looking out into a genuine beautiful valley that led to the Norrington estate. And it was like, it took my breath away. And I remember taking a screenshot and just posting it on Twitter and saying, look, however BFA turns out, I will always be thankful for this moment and how wonderful it was. And it still takes my breath away now. And it's not just how the zones look, it's just how they're laid out. And I was running around Drustvar today, just doing some world quests. And it really, like, just the geography of it is so natural and so beautifully realized and so realistic, in a way that I suspect we won't see in a WoW expansion again, because I've got a feeling, with the way that BFA has been overall received, that WoW will kind of retreat back into a much more high concept kind of fantasy vibe, which has served it so well before, which I think a lot of the player base will really enjoy, and I'm sure I will as well. But there will be moments, you know, when we get sent back to Kultiris or Zandalar or something like that, and we'll just be running up a perfectly realized like hill or something, and we'll just go, this was really good.
Yeah. I have the same feeling when I return to like Jade Forest right now in Pandaria. For me, that hill, it was actually going down. It was the really steep descent from northern borders of Zuldazar into Najmir. When you first get the quest to go to Najmir, and as you
through the Bloodgate and stuff.
Yeah, when you descend into it and the fog rolls in, Najmir like absolutely blew my mind. And I tend to, as someone who grew up in an actual swamp, gravitate more towards biomes that are completely alien to me. Snow zones and deserts are always my favorite. Always, because they're so alien. So it, like, to me, as someone who's grew up somewhere where there is no snow and there's so much water, deserts are impossible to form. But Najmir was just like a swamp cranked up to 11. I love that zone. I think it's my favorite zone from this expansion. Really?
For me, like, I think Kultiris is the greatest single continent ever created. And I think it's the way, for me, it's the way that the zones bleed into each other. And some may argue that the zones are all quite similar aesthetically, and they would say that as a bad thing, but it results in these magical moments, like where you travel over the mountains and through the mountain pass to get from Borealis to Stormsong. And then there's like a blockade where they're doing like checks on people going through, and there's like wagons and stuff, and you kind of sort out some problems there. And then you cross the brow of the hill, and then you can look down into Stormsong, like in front of you. And there's a similar moment in Drustvar where your missioning takes you up a mountain to the town at the top of the mountain, which is like just an incredibly Skyrim moment. You get there, and it's just this whole kind of, you know, like civilization up there, and it was so magical. And I love.
I'm glad you bring up Skyrim,
Vol'dun as well,
because I think that's kind of what BFA's continents, like, that's what they hit on. Because like Elder Scrolls games feel pretty similar, especially Skyrim. Feels like very like this is all one section of the world that is very similar, very Nordic, very northern, very tundra. And I think that's what's happening with BFA, I think to its credit, that I like, because we've had so many expansions now where there's really different biomes from zone to zone. And so I thought it was actually kind of refreshing in BFA, and still differentiated enough, because Stormsong Valley is gorgeous and picturesque, and you go to Drustvar and it's spooky. Like, also Drustvar, like that's might be my other favorite one. I think I just like scary zones. But and then, you know, Tiergard sound is just nautical as all get out.
That's some of the best music as well. Tiergard sound, so good.
Arguing with you there.
And then when you travel from the east, where Borealis is, and you travel to from the east, and you travel to the west, where like the bluff is, and you know, you have this other whole kind of like port town with the blockade, and where eventually the storyline ends up with Ashvane's kind of forces kind of sailing in, and that's where Jaina does her whole "I'm back" thing. Again, just like so beautifully realized. As far as the story goes, one of the criticisms I've heard of BFA is that, you know, the faction war is built up as being the main thing that's happening. And there are elements of that in the leveling experience, but the Alliance experience is very much the quest for Jaina and sorting out the Ashvane stuff, and the Horde experience is very much the Rastakhan sort of downfall and the building up of Talanji.
Mm-hmm. And
did you feel like that was disconnected from the main events that you were expecting from the actual kind of faction war and what have you?
Yeah, but I think that's also true of the Alliance. I think the faction war is the weakest part of this expansion, and it's the big blemish for me. I was just kind of disinterested in it, and I don't think they earned my interest. Because I really liked the Alliance story and the Horde story for the zones, the ones that were more central to the zones themselves.
Right.
And I thought it was really compelling, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I said, I was just straight up surprised by how much I liked everything on the Horde side of things. I wasn't really expecting to. And maybe that's why I liked it. Maybe my expectations were low, and I was kind of looking over the fence at the Alliance going, oh, you have such beautiful buildings, and it's piratey and nautical and Jaina. And then I was like, oh, damn, Bonsamdi is the coolest character ever, and I wasn't expecting this. And I actually really feel for Talanji's journey and how she's being sold out by her father. And there was some really good arcs over there. So every time we had to go back to Sylvanas, rawr, I'm evil, twisting my mustache, I was like, I don't care. This is so boring compared to what was happening on other side of Kultiris or Zandalar. Like, I was really into it.
Yeah.
And I'm also with you on, honestly, I'm overall pretty happy with the whole N'Zoth thing, but yeah, I think they could have been a little more like, here's an old god, deal with it.
Yeah, I think literally just having like N'Zoth on the box or something would have really helped. I just think selling it as the N'Zoth expansion, people would have been a lot less frustrated with not always it being incredibly clear where the main story of BFA was going, because they knew where it was going. You know, if N'Zoth was established as the big baddie from the start, then you'd have that endpoint, and people would be much more forgiving of cliffhangers and the storytelling that was employed in BFA, which was purposely quite obtuse at times, and purposely kept things from the player, and purposely didn't reveal itself all that much. And I think a more Brechtian technique of giving us an endpoint and then showing us the journey there would have been more useful. In hindsight.
I would have liked the Shrine of the Storm to be a slightly larger area of Stormsong Valley and have a higher like emphasis with maybe a little more faceless tentacle-y stuff going on.
It's weird because like looking back, you know, as that being a genuine complaint of like, oh, N'Zoth came out of nowhere and blah blah. Looking back, you know, it's pretty explicit. There's no missing it. You know, you've got Stormsong, which is full of literal faceless ones. You've got the Shrine of the Storms. You've got the Covenant of Storms later on. You've got all the stuff with Xalatath. The entire Horde starting experience essentially boils down to, apart from, you know, Rastakhan and Zul and stuff, is stop an old god. The first like raid is literally fight an old god. It's there all the way through. The Ashara Warbringer is very explicitly like, here is N'Zoth. Here's the first time you've just seen N'Zoth in any like Warcraft media at all, outside of Hearthstone. Like it was very, very explicit, but because no one had actually just come out and said, you know, and I think we would have actually been able to appreciate all of those things much more if someone had just said, this is the N'Zoth expansion. The expansion will end with us fighting N'Zoth. And I think all of those things that we experienced throughout we'd have appreciated them more for what they were. Had they had a bit less mystery about them, perhaps.
I agree. I agree. I just, I think I would have also been okay with just a little bit more kind of interaction with Old God and Old God minions, just in the course of leveling. I think would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, I think so too. I found the leveling experience incredibly satisfying, partly because I love Jaina, and I was genuinely moved by that story, and in a way that is no mean feat in World of Warcraft. It's hard to move you with a World of Warcraft story. It's quite easy to excite you with a World of Warcraft story. It's quite easy to inspire you with a World of Warcraft story. Like, yeah, I want to go and fight that. But to actually like move you is a different thing. And like they genuinely achieved that with the Alliance leveling story for me. Like I say, I'm an easy mark because I've got a soft spot for Jaina and for Kultiris anyway. But still, that was a new experience for me.
Yeah.
In World of Warcraft, and similar from the Horde story as well. For me, there wasn't a disconnect from the whole Horde and Alliance kind of faction war. Partly because I understood the concept of why we were in Kultiris and why we were in Zandalar. Like we were desperately trying to gather more troops and to get like a really good navy. You know, we were doing a Game of Thrones. We were like going, hey, if we can just get this navy together with like war elephants and stuff, then we're going to be okay. And that story was related to that, and we were the people who had been tasked with, you know, getting this force with their awesome navy on side. And then you had the war campaign to go along with that. And I actually thought that having an entire continent that you didn't go to at all, except on brief excursions in the war campaign before you hit max level and it became a much more regular thing, that actually felt awesome as well. Like those moments in, like, say, the Alliance war campaign where, you know, you're doing all your leveling around the zones in whatever order you want, but every now and then as you level, different chances to go over to the other enemy continent crop up. And so you see, and if you've got war mode on as well, it feels very dangerous. You see just these like little snippets of the other continent as you go over there, and you do feel like you're making kind of like enemy excursions into enemy territory. And I found that like incredibly satisfying, and that captured the element of the faction war for me really, really well. Like and all of that, and yeah, obviously it flattens out when you hit max level and you're going over there for world quests and stuff like that, and you become much more familiar with it. By then I'd leveled through both the Alliance and the Horde zones anyway, so I you know, there was very little mystery. Although it's really fun, like having leveled through the Alliance zones, going back to those zones as my Horde player as part of the war campaign, I saw completely different parts of those zones that I hadn't actually seen leveling up as an Alliance player. And it was, I think they totally nailed the two different leveling experience.
I agree. Wow. That was another part that I was pleasantly surprised by, because I kind of avoided going over to Kultiris in my first level up through Horde. I don't think I did it until I was max level. And then I got over there. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Like there's actual quests and like a little bit of story here. And I'm running around with Rexar, and I had a great time. And I was, I guess, expecting it to feel more tacked on than it ended up feeling. Like they actually had fully fleshed out questing experiences for the opposing faction on like their invading continent, which I really enjoyed. I thought it was well done. Really, at the end of the day, I think for me, the continents and the leveling experiences, they hit it out of the park, I think, in BFA.
And don't forget, there were cinematics up the wazoo.
Oh yeah.
Like throughout the leveling experience, like you know, in the Legion leveling experience, which I mean, the leveling experience has been of a type since WoD. Mm-hmm. Like the WoD leveling experience was brilliant. Legion stepped it up from there. I think BFA was better than Legion's, honestly. Like despite the excitement that the artifact weapon gave to the start of Legion's leveling experience, and that the Order Hall campaign kind of saw throughout, I think the War campaign is better than the Order Hall campaign. And I feel like
I bold-faced disagree with you.
Really?
Yes.
I think you're misremembering the Order Hall campaign. I think you are looking at the Order Hall campaign through very rose-tinted goggles there. Because the Order Hall campaigns were all, they were good, but a lot of those Order Hall campaigns were do 100 world quests, do 5 mission table quests that won't be completed for 2 weeks, do like just get another follower and stuff like that. They weren't always connected to any actual story that was happening. There was very little actually narrative, and the narrative that was there was really fun. But the actual questing involved with it was very, very basic, and the things you actually had to do for it were pretty much non-existent. Like with notable exceptions, like in the Rogue Order Hall where you go to Stormwind and you're sneaking around and stuff like that, or I guess the Paladin one's quite the Death Knight one is the famous one, which is really good and results in like an excursion into the Paladin Order Hall. And the way that the Paladin Order Hall campaign and the Priest Order Hall campaign kind of overlap is really satisfying as well.
The Death Knight Order campaign is one of the greatest things I've ever played in World of Warcraft.
It was awesome. Oh yeah, no, I'm not. Don't get me wrong. It was really, really good, but if you want to do a direct like-for-like comparison with either the Alliance or the Horde war campaign, I think if you started from scratch and you played through them both together, I don't think anyone would think that they compare. To be honest, like the war campaign had a much bigger scope, and there's a lot more going on. It's a lot more satisfying. There was never a moment in the war campaign where it was like, okay, now you have to do 10 mission table quests, and I guess we'll see you in a week.
I'm coming at the war campaign from a lore aspect, and I found it all boring and very insular. Whereas the achievement
You didn't
of
like it when you were going in full Dune, and then suddenly the San Lane were there, like killing gnomes, and you were like, "Heck, the San Lane are here!" And you didn't like it in the Horde campaign where you just had to go out into the open sea and just dive to the bottom of the ocean because you were trying to find like dead people, and like you had to keep turning your light off because there was a massive fish that was going to eat you and stuff like that.
No, because it's an underwater mission, and whoever likes underwater missions in any video game?
I thought it was brilliant. I loved it. I hate underwater missions. I thought that was great.
Oh man, I couldn't stand it. Everything with the war campaign was just, oh, this is the thing I'm the least interested in. Like with everything going on, I'm like, I could between Cool Tiras, Zandalar, and Old Gods. The war campaign was just, I don't give a shit. Why am I doing this? Why are we spending time with this?
I thought it was great. And then, of course, the Alliance one finished up with like placing the bombs that you'd eventually see at the beginning of the Battle for Tazara Law. I just thought it was great. I just thought it was really, really good. And yeah, okay, you're right. The Death Knight Order Hall campaign was great. But with that aside, it blows any of the other Order Hall campaigns out of the water for me.
I think I really give a lot of credit to the Order Hall campaigns because they made one for every damn class.
Oh yeah, I'm not taking away from that. I'm not taking away from that. But you know, I feel like you got that element of there being different stories, one of which you might not even experience if you didn't play both sides of the faction divide. So you had that element of like, this is my story and other people are having a different story. That is the best thing about like Order Hall campaigns and artifacts and stuff like that. It feels like this is your story. Other people are having a very different experience right now. So I feel like the Two Continents and the war campaign was it captured a lot of the good stuff about that, whilst also giving us a much deeper and crafted and involved experience than the Order Hall campaigns. So for me, it was kind of like it was like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was just the whole how is it going to end with Sylvanas thing. For me, just drug on way too long.
Oh yeah, but I think that went beyond the war campaign. I feel
for
like
me that is the war campaign. It's interesting. Our perspectives on it are so different.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I guess I also really like alts, and the war campaign is just the same every single time. And in Legion, I got a different experience on every different class I played.
I guess that's true. I mean, not every time, obviously, because one time it's Alliance and one time it's Horde. But yeah, third time onwards.
Yeah, third time onwards, I'm just like, actually, I'm just avoiding the war campaign entirely.
Think, again, the Order Hall campaigns were like suspiciously similar in many ways. You know,
I never saw that because I did
that complete 5 Order Hall like mission table quest always popped at the same point in the story.
Okay,
no matter what Order Hall campaign you were doing. That do 100 world quests or 50 or whatever it was. That one always popped at the same time of the story every time. Like it didn't matter. You know, there were universal similarities between the Order Hall campaigns. Let's not muck around.
Yeah, but they had to learn that those sucked so that they weren't in the BFA war campaign. So
yeah, even the artifacts, man. Some of the artifact acquisition storylines in Legion were literally the same. They obviously like ran out of kind of cool storylines at one point, and they were like, Karazhan's got loads of artifacts in it.
Yeah, no,
if you go to Karazhan, if you go to the dungeons in Karazhan, they got so many artifacts down there. Let's just put all the artifacts that we haven't actually managed to quite write a proper story for yet. Let's just put all those ones down there.
That is fair, but again, that's like literally the introduction to getting your artifact weapon, and then you're off to, if it's a new class, like the story overall is different from what you saw on the other class. So that I give that a lot more credit for those reasons. But whatever the case is, I stand by being pleasantly surprised when going to the other continent from the faction that I was leveling in BFA. That part of the war campaign really sung for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I felt like when I had completed the questing, I felt like I completed a story more so than in Legion, certainly, and more so even than in WoD, which I think did that a little bit better through its leveling. I felt like I had been involved in something on both the Horde and the the Alliance side, and I feel like the way that the storyline's kind of climaxed with a dungeon that only unlocked when you got to max level, and that when you completed the war campaign in the initial leveling experience, that's when you could unlock the Siege of Orgrimmar, Siege of Borealis, and that's when you could unlock King's Rest as well. And that felt like a that kind of like light attunement for those two dungeons. I thought worked really well as well. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I dug that as well. I'm with you on that. I'm with you. I did not expect our perspectives to be so different on War Campaign. This is fascinating.
Did you see the way that I perfectly sieged us into dungeons and raids there?
Yes,
by the way.
Let's do it.
That was pretty pro.
Yeah. Because
and people say I don't know what I'm doing. People say I'm an absolute amateur.
You're going to become a Segway master. Master. That's what you're currently leveling up.
Okay, so I want to touch on it because clearly we're not going to finish this in this episode. It's clearly a two-parter. I think we've established that now. But like, so I feel like I can go a bit more in depth with this. Someone's just said in the chat, people can't handle attunements at all. I feel like that's been a recurring theme in Battle for Azeroth, is that a lot of things that people have as kind of like tradition been asking for the return of in WoW. And I feel like this has been, especially in the build up to Classic releasing, because don't forget when BFA released, Classic was not yet with us. So there's a lot of romanticism, as always, and understandably so, about the way WoW was done in the past. And attunements was part of that. And, it's like, why don't we have attunements anymore? Why isn't that a thing? And you can see why that's not a thing, with the way a lot of people react to the fact that there is the lightest of attunements to King's Rest and Siege of Borealis, and the way people talked about those two dungeons and how they were locked out of those dungeons and they couldn't experience some of the content because of it. Because I think were they Mythic only as well? Throughout the leveling experience,
were they?
I think they might have been Mythic only. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
King's Rest was Mythic only.
Well, they might have been heroic only anyway. But there was something difficult about them. Apparently, chat saying this, they were Mythic only, which I think makes sense.
They were Mythic
yeah,
only.
they were apparently.
Really?
Yeah, we've had 2 people in the chat saying they were now, so that's enough for me. Yeah. So.
At the start.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and
with the achievement of completing the war campaign. People rage over that, and there have been other elements of things that we romanticize from WoW's past that have been very lightly reintroduced in BFA, which people have railed against as well.
I wouldn't call it, for me, I'm not railing against it, but I can kind of see where it's coming from, because
me too.
You're not I don't think you are explicitly directed. I mean, I don't know. In a certain degree, you are explicitly directed towards the war campaign, but the fact that it is basically part of the leveling experience, and you could very easily hit max level before even like really starting the war campaign, it feels like you don't need to go do it. So if you were unaware that you needed to do it to unlock a dungeon, then it feels like a chore suddenly, I think. Whereas getting attuned for something like Molten Core, which was done through running dungeons over and over again, still in a way feels like endgame because it was a late game dungeon, and felt like something to me, this is my interpretation of it, felt like something you kind of wanted to be doing anyway, and less like a chore, if that makes sense.
Was it the war campaign that unlocked Siege of Borealis and King's Rest, or was it the central storyline of the leveling campaign? I've got a feeling it was the latter. I got a feeling that it was directly. It was linked to. So you had to do the Jaina storyline and get to the end of that, which that's when Siege of Borealis unlocked, because it was directly linked to that.
If you were
storyline.
Alliance,
yeah.
But if you were Horde, you had to do the war campaign. Yes,
maybe. Yeah. Oh, did it just happen at max leveling? I'm not sure. But
then I think it was vice versa, because Horde unlocks King's Rest at the end.
On your faction side, it was linked to the story that it related to, rather than the war campaign.
Yeah, I'm honestly, after forgetting that it was Mythic only at the beginning, I'm questioning my own memory of any of this.
Well, I thought that was neat. I thought that was a neat touch. But anyway, that does bring us to dungeons and raids, which I think are like one of the most important part of any expansion.
Yes.
And of course, a unique position really that BFA dungeons were in, because after the massive success of Mythic Plus in Legion, which did kind of revolutionize dungeons and the way we play dungeons in modern WoW, certainly. And I always think of the WoD experience, which was very much, I played each dungeon maybe 20, 30, 40, at most 50 times throughout the entire expansion. You know, I did them on normal, I did them on heroic. The second I got any raid gear at all from Highmall, there was no reason to do those dungeons anymore. And I didn't do those dungeons until the final patch of WoD, when they introduced Mythic dungeons, which you could do, you know, once a week for loot. So the amount of times that you actually went into dungeons in WoD was, compared to Legion and then BFA, minuscule. You do those dungeons a minuscule amount of times. And then Legion came along, and suddenly you had this reason to be going into dungeons so much more, and people learning the dungeons to a much deeper level because of that, which I feel encouraged the designers in BFA to make a mistake when it came to BFA dungeons. I'd like to hear your opinion on the dungeons, first of all.
Overall, I really like them. I think my most surface level criticism of dungeons is that I wish they had added more. And really, it's more a criticism of 8.3 than I think it is of BFA dungeons overall. I think if 8.3 had like 2 dungeons, like it would have just been like, oh, it's a good patch, and we're not going to argue about it.
And 8.1 as well. 7.1 is when Karazhan came along, and we didn't get any new dungeon in 8.1. We had to wait until 8.2 for our Karazhan dungeon.
Yeah, you know? Yeah. Which, frankly, good dungeon. Operation Mechagon.
Oh, that's great.
I finally have done it. I really slept on that one.
And the fact that Mechagon had a hard mode as well, brilliant. Like genius. Like really, really good.
Yeah, yeah. But like overall, like I have a a couple dungeons I don't like that much, but there's also some of my favorite dungeons in this expansion. Waycrest Manor is one of the coolest dungeons in the history of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Like, don't at me. Unless you agree with me.
No one's atting you, Garrett. Everyone's just nodding sagely, like, yeah.
Everyone's like, yeah, who doesn't love the Haunted Mansion, you crazy person? You're not taking a bold...
spooky house.
Not making a bold statement here. Yeah, no, I don't strongly dislike any dungeon, really. I kind of like them all. Like, I remember at the time being annoyed by Motherlode, but now I like going back and owning its space.
So I agree with the general criticism of BFA dungeons, which is that they are very trash heavy, and that kind of feels a little bit oppressive, particularly in Mythic Plus. And I think the reason why that happened was, I feel like the dungeons in Legion were not designed with Mythic Plus in mind. Mythic Plus was kind of like a new system that was put on top of the dungeons that were kind of designed independently of it. And you could see how that caused problems in Legion, where you had things like the Maw of Souls like meta, and that being by far the most efficient Mythic Plus to run. So people just farmed that one over and over and over again. And when they sat down to make the BFA dungeons, I get a feeling that the devs were like, okay, cool. So we know what Mythic Plus is all about now. It's not an expansion-only feature. We know it's now one of the most popular things as well. We actually have an esports scene now because of it, which, wow, that was unexpected. And what works best in Mythic Plus, you know? And having lots of varied trash with lots of trash mechanics. So lots of CC, lots of things that are going to need kicking, lots of things that are going to need like keeping in one place while you pull other things to a different place. Lots of those kind of mechanics. That's what we've seen be interesting in Mythic Plus. So we're going to bear that in mind when we design these BFA dungeons. And I think that was what kind of, I think they overdid it basically, and I feel like as a result the boss fights in BFA dungeons in Mythic Plus feel like kind of non-events. They feel like breathers in between the actual challenge of a Mythic Plus fight, which is the trash. Whenever I get to a boss fight in a Mythic Plus dungeon, I'm like, oh, thank goodness I can relax. And I'm not sure that's how you should feel when you get to a boss.
Yeah, I know.
You know,
I've heard this batted around a few times, but the way you laid it out is a very good point. Yeah, you know, because there is a tempo that I think needs to be achieved.
But then when Mechagon hit Mythic Plus and the workshop in Mechagon, or the actual like the second half of Mechagon, whichever one that is, Yeah, workshop.
It is workshop.
Because that is such a boss-centric dungeon. Like, there's barely any trash in that dungeon at all. It's like essentially just 5 bosses in a row. And it's the most fun Mythic Plus dungeon, pretty much. And I would really like to see going into Shadowlands, I'd like to see them go, okay, either we just don't take Mythic Plus into account at all when we're designing these dungeons, and whatever happens, or we focus more on creating really interesting boss fights, because that's just more interesting from Mythic Plus point of view. Who knows? But I feel like they took. I would have probably done the same thing if I was a dev and I was sitting around the table and they were like, "Hey, we need interesting trash. That's how we make interesting Mythic Plus dungeons." And I'd have been like, "Yeah, I think you're right. Based on the evidence of Legion, I think you're right. Let's do that." And I think in hindsight, that was the wrong lesson. And I feel like there are summer fixes that just aren't fun. And, that are challenging, but the key to a greater fix is to be challenging and fun. And there's nothing challenging and fun about Grievous. Oh, Grievous is all right these days, actually. But there are summer fixes that are just not, they're not fun. They're not enjoyable. And there were a couple of fixes in Horrific Visions, which I think would work really well in Mythic Plus, that I think we'll see crop up in Shadowlands. The great thing about BFA Dungeons for me and Mythic Plus was the introduction of seasonal affixes, 2 of which have been incredible, 1 of which was fine, and 1 of which was absolutely awful. That being the first one with the funny little bug that used to run around and you had to kill. That was a terrible affix. But I feel like, have you played much Mythic Plus in 8.3 with the Awakened affix?
No,
with the columns? Okay, so Awakened is amazing. Awakened is so good because it just essentially solves the problem of BFA Dungeons in that it's a clever trash skip. It's a way of just skipping trash, but it feels like you're playing the game, and it feels like you're being clever, and it feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do. So you don't feel like you're cheating and skipping the trash. It feels like it's a genuine part of the dungeon that you're doing. And you still have something big to fight while you're skipping the trash. There's still like this big monster chasing you. And it's just genius and wonderful. And literally every single dungeon that I've played in 8.3, I've enjoyed more because of it. Like, it's improved every single dungeon, and because to a large degree has solved the problems that I just stated about BFA dungeons.
Yeah, because what you're basically talking about is like the tempo of a dungeon, right? Like the speed you're moving through it. How much of this time is spent on trash and CCing and moving through that, and how much of this time is spent on bosses, and is that an equal distribution of my time, my effort spent in this dungeon? And you're right. The way you've laid it out, it's a lot. It's mostly trash time. It's mostly trash time. And also, I guess I probably have been favoring dungeons I actually like more than usual, and also just haven't spent that much time with Mythic Plus this expansion, just because of splitting my time between this and Classic. I'm spending a lot of time just playing solo and just trying to keep my character not a detriment when I do show up to raid. So I don't spend as much time in Mythic Plus just because it's there's just the hurdle of I need to put a group together. There's not a way for me to get into one very quickly, very easily. And now in 8.3, spend more time in Horrific Visions.
I think that's fair enough. Yeah. I think there's a big issue that has become extra noticeable with Mythic Plus dungeons. It's something we talked about on this podcast before, but in BFA it's become a bit more noticeable than it was in Legion, which is the gearing aspect of it. And the idea that something that we'll be talking about, I'm sure, when we come to Azerite armor and stuff a little bit later on, the gearing aspect of Mythic Plus is a problem. And the fact that, when 8.2 rolls around, you are going into Mythic Plus to try and re-farm the exact same gear that you farmed from Mythic Plus in 8.1. So, I've seen a lot of not very good criticism of BFA come out of this, which is like a general fatigue with we just replace all our gear every new patch and every new season. We just replace all our gear, and it's really uninspiring. It's like, well, that's how WoW's always been. And the second that we introduced a gearing system that you didn't have to replace every tier, and that you had to do old content to get, which is essences, people absolutely hated having to go back and do the content that wasn't relevant anymore to get old essences that they didn't have before. So it's it's natural to replace all your gear every tier. That's part of an MMO. That's
I
part
think
of an
there's a
RPG.
surprising amount of that is tied to just the people caring more than I think they like to admit about the paper doll aspect of World of Warcraft and their character. And that is something I think the game has really failed at. Because it just doesn't. There's something I think that just psychologically doesn't feel exciting about getting the same damn chess piece for the 11th time.
Well, that's it, and that's what I'm leading to, is that we've heard a lot of incorrect criticism, I think, of and people kind of putting that down to the general replacing all your gear every patch, but that's not what people are actually annoyed about. The annoying thing, and the thing that's got people down in BFA, is the fact that it's the same gear that they're farming to replace their old gear, but at a higher item level.
Yeah.
You know, they're not replacing their gear. They're not getting new, better gear that replaces all their old gear. They're trying to get the same gear again,
with better
but
stats
at a higher level.
Yeah.
And that applies to Azurite armor, because essentially you're just going for Azurite armor with the same BIS traits that you had on your last Azurite armor. And it applies to Mythic Plus, because if there's like a really good trinket in Mythic Plus that you want, or something, or a really good weapon, which is plentiful for lots of classes, then you are essentially just trying to get that same weapon that you spent ages farming in 8.1. You're trying to get it again in 8.2, just at a higher item level, and that does feel horrible. And that's something that the devs really have to look at in Shadowlands. And I feel like the only answer is to literally replace the loot tables every tier for Mythic Plus bosses.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because like I look at it from my liking of vaults, and it also makes me think of Classic a little bit, even though, as you've famously made fun of, I've just paused playing that entirely right now, because the grind from like 54 to 60 is.
Did I make fun of that? I don't remember making fun of that.
But there's something. But even like to go a little bit further into WoW's history, like with something like Wrath of the Lich King, where I just went alt crazy. I had so many alts in Wrath, it was ridiculous. I liked, and this was true in Classic and it was true in Wrath of the Lich King, having like a box I could check off, like while I was gearing up on an alt. If I was trying to catch up to ICC back then, it was like, cool, I'll just, farm badges and get my TOC gear so that I can start running ICC. So like I'm done with TOC gear. That box is checked. What do I do now? I do the new dungeons and I do the new raid. Cool. Like that's I can focus on. And I think this is the challenge that the repeatability of the Mythic Plus system presents, which is you are doing.
And it's a unique challenge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a new challenge, and I
like Mythic Plus, and I don't want it to go away. But I think I want them to find a way to reintroduce like your gear, like your shopping list for gear. I want them to find a way to reintroduce that, and for it to be finite, and for there to be an end to the tunnel. Because
that
now
is like, I think we're both talking about replacing the whole loot table every tier, aren't we? And that's a phenomenal amount of work. Like that's an incredible amount of work. And I've been desperately trying to think of a different way of solving the problem that didn't include that. But I'm at the stage now where I feel like that's the only way. That's the only way. And I guess you'd have to make the loot like vaguely themed around the patch and the tier that we are now in. If not aesthetically, then just like thematically and like name wise and flavor text wise and effect wise and things like that. But yeah, I think you're looking at replacing the whole loot table. I think that's the only way you can do it. That's the only way you can get away from that specific problem, is to replace in its entirety the Mythic Plus loot table every tier. Because it's at the moment it's an incredibly unsatisfying system, which is making people think that other things are a problem that aren't. And it's that bad, and it needs sorting out.
What if we brought back badges and tiers, and you could get the tier gear with badges, and you could get the badges from Mythic Plus?
That would make it easily the most efficient way to get tier gear. It's a
knob that it's a dial that could be turned. Right, it's all it's an economy that needs to be managed.
The problem with Mythic Plus is that it's so repeatable, and like the whole concept of Mythic Plus is that it's there to be repeated, like ad infinitum. Really, you know, and that's the whole point of it, and that's the joy of it, that's the fun of it, is like there's always a key to do, there's always something to push, there's always like a group to help out, and like if you're doing it high levels, there's always a challenge. Like the different levels of key give you the challenge which is ideally suited to you, and so you can always push yourself no matter what level of player you are, and there's always a reward appropriate to you for that. And there's always then, with the weekly chest, a reason to be doing multiple Mythic Pluses throughout a week, because then you've got like a big overall bit of gear that you can get at the end of the week and I just feel like having a currency that you grind and save up within Mythic Plus for non-Mythic Plus rewards is dangerous, because I feel like one of the biggest challenges of balancing Mythic Plus loot has been so that it's not the best way to gear. And that's a very difficult tightrope to walk, you know, because at the end of the day, as a dev, you always want the best gear really to be in raid, you know, and because the loot is so plentiful in Mythic Plus, and because you have this Diablo-like thing of, you know, just handfuls of loot, and maybe this one will be good, but maybe the rest is thrown out and stuff like that. The danger is always that Mythic Plus is going to be the best way to gear. And you don't want that. No one wants that. You want it to be like a valuable part of your gearing process, but you don't want it to be the best way to get raid gear, which is what would happen if you introduce badges into it. Just because of like the way that the entire system is kind of directed towards repeating in a way that hasn't been the case with dungeons ever, really.
Yeah, it's just something in the back of my mind, because we also have different tiers of the current raid armor already through the different difficulties that exist of the raid. So it's another thing I look at. Do they, I mean, if we're trying to adjust the cosmetic boredom that comes with this system, do we just start treating it like we treat the different visuals for the raid armor that exists? You know, do we design a set that you get from dungeons that looks similar, but slight variations on it, you know, each patch cycle as it goes up in eye level and power? Would you be more
I think that's a different issue. But I think it's also an issue, and I think, yes, I think Mythic Plus would definitely benefit from having specific cosmetic Mythic Plus rewards, whether that be armor sets or mounts, and that's something we're seeing in this season in 8.3. There's the Great Worm from Beyond mount that you get for doing your Keystone Master, which is why I'm doing my Keystone Master, because they put a reward on it, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'll do it now then. Because I'm never going to ride that ugly piece of shit, but I want it because it's there. And I think cosmetic rewards, I mean, look at, you know, you could have an element of Mage Tower there, you know, if you had like a specific weapon appearance or armor appearance that you could get through Mythic Plus. I think that's incredibly valuable. And I'm amazed that it didn't happen in BFA. I felt convinced that was something they were going to introduce in BFA after Legion, because like it was pretty obvious that that's one of the things that would really benefit Mythic Plus.
It's a big carrot on a stick for you for Arena, right? Like it made you go to Arena, the fact that there was a mount at the end of that stick, right? So why not apply that to the repeatable content of Mythic Plus?
Yeah. Sorry, someone's saying in the chat, Talias, and there are players that still don't have a weapon drop yet. Badges or components of crafting fix that. I think you were misunderstanding like the problem that we're describing in Mythic Plus there, which is that, you know, it didn't matter if there was a currency you could grind to help you get the drop that you wanted in Mythic Plus. That wouldn't make a difference. The problem is it would still be the same weapon that you wanted in 8.1 that you're trying to get in 8.2. You're not trying to get a new weapon to replace the thing that you got in 8.1. You're trying to get the same weapon. And that's where the real soul-crushing element of that comes from. That's the big problem for me. It's not that, your weapon isn't dropping and I need some way to get a currency to get a guaranteed drop of that eventually. That's a slightly different issue. The issue is like it's the same gear. And that's horrible. That's really horrible. Like you get the Kultiran shit sword from Tol Dagor in season 1. You need the Kultiran shit sword in season 2 as well. It's not even a new sword. It's the same sword, but at tier 2 levels. Like it's soul destroying, it's crushing, it's horrible. And literally just changing the name of the sword and the dungeon that it dropped from and the look of it too, if you could, that would go a long way to alleviating that problem.
I think the look of it is
feel like you're getting different gear.
I think the way the look of it is like the most important, at least to me.
Maybe, yeah.
Like,
I think the name and the flavor text, and I think you'd want to mix up the stats and stuff as well and put it in different
it's something that
you'd want to make it as different as possible.
It's a big challenge in World of Warcraft as it exists now.
Job.
But I think, so much of the part of the science of the fun of World of Warcraft at a certain point, a big drive for a lot of players was that this looks different. Visually upon seeing it, you other player that is not me, by looking at my character and looking at my gear, you know what I have accomplished.
For sure.
And those waters have gotten so muddy with things like transmog and whatnot, which I think is a good addition to the game. That it is a challenge. I don't know what the correct answer is.
I feel like it, and I've desperately tried to find a more efficient answer to this problem, because for me it is the main problem with Mythic Plus, and I actually, it's something we've talked about throughout the expansion, but for me, I honestly can't see a better way. I can't see any other way of solving the problem than literally rewriting the loot tables every tier, which is such a big, I think that's a much bigger job than we're even giving it credit for, saying it's a massive job. I think it's bigger than we can even really imagine, but I think it's got to happen. I think they need to literally have a team to do that.
Because our conversation here, the one I like the most and seems realistic is slightly altering the appearance of the gear.
Oh, I mean, that's adding even more work to it, really, but yeah, why not? I mean,
as opposed to gear that completely looks different from go back to the drawing board, conceive entirely new swords, axes, armor, shoulder pads, all that.
Well, for me, I think there should be an armor set. I mean, and look, they're not going to have war fronts to have to make armor sets for in Shadowlands, are they? So let's have a unique armor set that would have gone into war fronts and did in BFA before they killed that.
Actually, that's a really good point.
Let's have a specific armor set that you collect from Mythic Plus.
Because, dude, I don't like Warfronts. I love the armor sets from Warfronts. I think they're rad.
And maybe there's one armor set. Maybe there's two. Maybe there's one armor set that you get just from the chests at the end of dungeons, and then maybe in your weekly chest there's an elite version. You know how the Warfronts armor had the general set, but then when you actually completed the weekly mission for the Warfront, there was an extra spiky version.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Totally. Maybe that bit can drop from the weekly chest, but the rest of it just has a chance to drop from the end of dungeon chest, stuff like that. It sounds like a no-brainer. That's not us having an amazing idea. That's just a really obvious idea. And something that I was convinced was going to happen in BFA.
Yeah.
But I think I don't think that's the answer to the gearing problem, but I think that's also a really good thing that it makes no sense Mythic Plus doesn't have, and would be an obvious improvement to Mythic Plus. My Mythic Plusing has already seen a massive step up in 8.3 because I have a reason to do my Keystone Master. I give me something, give me a reward, give me something to collect beyond just powering myself. Give me a mount, give me an armor set.
If there were so including 0.0, if there were 4 unique mounts to get through Mythic Plus over the 4 patch cycles of BFA, I think we'd be looking back on it a lot more with rosier glasses, because it would have been this carrot at the end of the stick.
And the Great Worm from Beyond is only a recolor, but I still want it.
I want it. I think it's a cool mount, and I think
it's great.
I'm staring down I haven't been keeping up with my Mythic Plus barrel, going, oh, I want the worm.
The corrupted gear makes Mythic Plus lots of fun as well.
Yeah.
They add, say what you want, it does add a different element to Mythic Plus, and it does help that this season's affix is so much fun as well.
Yeah.
See, the Awakened affix is I'm inspired to do 10 and above keys just for that, because I think it's genuinely exciting. So yeah, it's cool. It's good.
I think
generally Mythic Plus continues to be one of my favorite things about the entire game, and it's just genius. And whereas the dungeons, I don't think they clearly weren't as many of them as in Legion. I think that's representative of one of the major problems about BFA for me, because like I say, if you compare them on a patch by patch basis, BFA kind of stands up with a lot of expansions. It's kind of more expansion-wide things that are the problem with BFA for me. And one of them, as I think the second worst thing about BFA, the second biggest problem about BFA, has been the scheduling. and the patch release cycle. And I've said that on this. And I think that's a genuinely important part of an MMO. I know people are like, no, it'd be better if they take their time and only put stuff out when it's right. It's like, no, it'd be better if it was right and released on a good schedule, like Legion was, because that's a really important part of enjoying the content. Like to have it had the same enjoyment from BFA content that you got from Legion content, BFA content had to be even better because you had to play it for longer. Like, we're not judging it on the same standards even, because like in some cases we played the Legion content for half the amount of time. It had to keep us like entertained for half the amount of time that the BFA content had to. So the BFA content had to be twice as good for us to judge it the same as the Legion content, which is pretty unfair.
Such an ephemeral
but it's
thing,
true,
right?
though.
Like,
and like, yeah, exactly. And like, it's a really important part of it. And I feel like the amount of dungeons you get in an expansion is another one of those things. The worst part of the expansion, which we'll get onto next episode, I think, is Azerite armor. But
very,
we'll discuss that
I very strictly do not want to get into the conversation about Azerite armor, but I think the scramble to fix Azerite armor played a very large role.
Oh my gosh! I mean, this there's a reason why we're going to leave that till part 2 for sure.
Yes, 100%. But let's wrap this up with raids, because we haven't even breathed a word about raids yet in BFA.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, anyway, sorry. Just to finish that, I'd like to see dungeons in Shadowlands be more boss centric. Or else just forget that Mythic Plus exists at all and see what happens. And like still have Mythic Plus, obviously, but don't design the dungeons around it.
That's an interesting...
Let the affixes do that. Let the affixes kind of the seasonal affixes, which I think they should definitely keep, by the way, and replace the loot tables every tier and have unique cosmetic rewards.
I think the idea of letting affixes not be this carved in stone thing is just good and healthy, because if something doesn't work, cool. Get it out of there. Bring something new in.
And also, I'd like to see a reworking of weekly affixes as well. I think there are some affixes in Horrific Visions which would work really, really well in Mythic Plus. And I'd like to see some more imaginative affixes as well, rather than, I don't know, stuff that just isn't fun. Yes. Like some of them are at the moment.
Yeah. But let's move on. Let's talk about raids, because for me this is a high point of BFA, and this was one of my most like ramshackle not rating on the regular expansions in a while for me, and yet I still have it landed on me very positively. I've really enjoyed the raids of BFA. Has one of my favorite fights in a very long time.
What's that?
Jaina. The Jaina fight, man, is
nice.
Radical. I really was impressed by that one at the end of Battle of Dazar Lore. Like that was just really it hit the like kind of the vibe I wanted it to be. I'm like, I want ice and boats, and they brought it in spades. It was, because it's been a while since I've really like looked forward to a boss fight based on my like lore obsession, right? It's probably been since Arthas that I was really like, okay, they have to check these boxes for me to really like this fight, and they did that with Arthas, and I really enjoyed it, and I think they nailed it with Jaina as well. So yeah, but what about you, Taliesin? You've spent a lot of time and have I feel placed a lot of emphasis on raids in the content that you create.
Yeah, I love raiding. It's one of my favorite things to do, even though I'm not a Mythic raider. Although, you know, we often do the first 3 bosses of a Mythic raid, which I think makes us a Mythic raid guild, just saying. But yeah, like I'd love to get more into Mythic raiding, but I would never claim to speak about raiding from the authority that a Mythic raider has. And I know that they have very different issues with raiding, and there's different things that those players look for in raiding than I would necessarily. So I can only speak from the point of view as someone who takes great pride in going through heroic with my guild and just enjoying it. And for me, it is the most enjoyable content in the game, even at that level. I remember like first time I met Preach and we were hanging out and we were having some drinks, and he was like, "So do you only raid at heroic then?" I'm like, yeah, so that's all I do with my raid. And he's like, "And yet you say that raiding is one of your favorite parts of the game?" And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd say it probably is my favorite part of the game. It's like, how are you satisfied with just doing heroic raiding then? And he wasn't having a go. He was just like genuinely interested to know. I was like, well, because for me, it's about accomplishing something with my friends. and I don't make my friends based on how good they are at raiding. And my friend group isn't good enough to do Mythic raiding, so I'd rather like complete something which is an appropriate challenge to the group of friends that I have than have to make a whole new bunch of friends who just happen to be good at Mythic raiding.
I really, really understand that.
Yeah.
Like I get that a lot. I think there's it's something that comes out of this interconnected world that we inhabit now. That I think leads to that kind of like that wall of being like, wait, why if it's your favorite thing, why aren't you doing like the hardest version of it? And I don't like, I never aspired to be a pro Super Smash Brothers player while I was, smack talking my buddies at my birthday party eating Cheetos. Like that wasn't the reason I loved that game and still have a lot of fondness for it.
Yeah. I mean, someone's saying in chat that that's the problem with raid levels of difficulty. It's not linear progression; it's exponential. Not everyone's a mythic raider. I mean, I'd say that that's the good thing about raid levels.
Because, I think that is. Yeah. I do too, and I like where your head is at with it, which is just enjoy what you can accomplish, the level that you can play to.
Well, exactly, and it's player appropriate, right? So, my group of friends and players getting through heroic is kind of the same challenge as leading a mythic team through mythic in a way, because they're this at a higher level and they have more time to prepare for the raid and to get their neck up before raid and to make sure they have like the optimum gear and stuff before raid, which is again something that the people in my team won't always do. We do take a great pride in preparing and things like that, but it's part of what we enjoy about preparing for raid, and certainly I do when a new patch hits. It's preparing for the raid, which is my main motivation for doing the content, and that's why the time in between a new patch hitting and me completing the raid is always the best time in WoW for me, because everything I do and every tiny little bit of power gain that I get, that's going to help me in the raid, and that's why I'm doing it. And it's fantastic. So, and what it means is the different raid levels, difficulty levels, allow the top level of Mythic to be much, much harder than it would be otherwise. Like, Mythic raiding now is as difficult as it's ever been. And if there was only one level of difficulty for raids, like there had been in the past, it would be easier than it is now. Like, you wouldn't have anything as hard as Mythic level raiding if there was only one difficulty level. And I think that's important for top level players, that they have that level of difficulty. And I think it's important for people just below that they have a heroic equivalent, which is like a challenge for them. And we can always dip our toe into Mythic, and we often do once we're done with that. But I mean, we have a bigger team than 20, and we don't really want to drop anyone anyway, so it's tough. But as for the raids themselves, I was quite unmoved by Uldir. I was done with Uldir after a couple of weeks, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know what it was about that raid. It just didn't really click for me. Although there are a couple of fights that I really liked in it. Battle for Dazara Law is clearly one of the all-time great raids in the history of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, that is one that kind of goes along the story of BFA for me, which is expecting not to like it and being very surprised, because aesthetically, and if you haven't noticed, I'm really motivated by lore and set pieces. And this was a set piece I do not care about. I don't think Zuldazar is a particularly cool looking city. And as a Horde player, I spent way too much freaking time there already. I wasn't excited to go into the raid. I know
I guess there's that. Yeah,
I know exactly what I'm going to go look at. Although we got down to the vault and that was a unique area, but there wasn't enough unique areas. But
I think the gear sets from Uldir were very good, as people are pointing out in the chat.
But then you get into like what raids live and die on, which is the bosses, and the bosses in Dazara Lore were really freaking fun. I liked fighting them.
There were some things going on with some of those bosses which were just totally out there and zany and crazy, and it's a shame that people who didn't experience it at the time, when they come back and do something like Mecha Talk, and they're just like clearing the raid for all gear sets and stuff like that, they'll never know just how brilliant it was. They'll never know just how crazy Mecha Talk was and what a flat out just stupid fun fight it was. but not at the expense of like traditional raid play and mechanics and stuff like that. There are some like gimmick fights where they're outrageous fun, but they're not really a real raid fight. They're kind of like, you know, they're a gimmick. Whereas Mecha Talk managed to combine like an incredibly imaginative idea with like a proper satisfying raid execution, and it was brilliant.
Yeah, Mechatork's great. Obviously, as I mentioned, Jaina is just a standout for me for this entire expansion and raiding in general. I absolutely loved it. Najatar, for some reason, didn't land for me particularly great. I loved the way it looked, but the bosses didn't make a huge impression on me.
I'm gonna stick my neck out on this one. I'm gonna say that the Eternal Palace, Najatar, would have improved exponentially if it had been all underwater. You put that whole raid underwater, I think you're having a good time. Seriously, I just think that after
found ways to get around
Zara-Lore, which had such like a strong theme, like and such a strong and such a beautiful storytelling angle as well. Mm-hmm. Like, don't forget, there was a cinematic at the beginning of that raid, and there was another full cinematic halfway through that raid, and then you fought Jaina Proudmoore on a boat and on an iceberg. Like, there is some strong storytelling, and then you had like that brilliant thing where, okay, so before BFA, you know, happened, then we were in like early alpha and stuff like that, and you know, we're making all our speculation videos and stuff like that on our channel. We made a video which was like, you know, it would make a really good raid in BFA, because it's the whole Horde Alliance thing. It would be really good if like one of the raids was a battle and the Horde had different bosses to the Alliance and had like a different journey through it. And, you know, they could be the same bosses, but one is themed to Horde and one is themed to Alliance and stuff like that. And you know, maybe at the end you fought Sylvanas if you're Alliance, and you fought Anduin if you're Anduin if you're Horde, and something like that. And then they did that idea with, I'm not saying they stole the idea. I'm not saying they took our idea. Okay. Just like I'm not saying that they took our idea about the new leveling system in Shadowlands, even though we also made a video on that before they announced it. I'm not saying they stole the idea. I'm just saying it's the same idea. That's all. So I was uber excited about Zara-Lore as soon as they kind of announced it anyway, because it's exactly what we thought would be really cool. In BFA, and they did it really, really well. So you've got that entire thing of like having the Horde and Alliance, you know, a different opening 3 bosses, and then a different storyline for both. There were the beautiful lore moments, like when you arrived at King Rastakhan as an Alliance player. You see Gen Greymane being very polite and respectful to King Rastakhan and saying, you have to come with us, you know, the Horde are bad, you know, don't make us fight you. And he's like, no, I will fight you. Bonsandi, come to my aid. But then if you, the same fight, at the beginning of the same fight as a Horde player, like you've got Gen Greymane there going, we're going to kill you, Rastakhan. We're here to sort you out and stuff like that. And just like the unreliable narrator and stuff like that. Just really clever stuff. And it was brilliant. The weakness of that raid was the same for all of the raids throughout this entire expansion, which was, for me, a lack of replayability related to the fact that there are no tier sets to collect. Like, once I completed that raid, why would I go back?
There's a weird through line with just a lack of cosmetic.
Well, not cosmetic. Like, for me, it's okay. So, because I'm not really into the cosmetics in that respect. Although, you know, it's nice. But for me, the tier sets is literally the 2 and 4 set. You know, and 6 set they became in Legion at some points as well. And having that 4 set in like as high a level as you can get, so that it's going to help you in the next raid, and then so that you can use 2 of those pieces in the next raid to make your 6 set. You know, like that's really important, and it was a reason why I played the Legion raids so much more than the BFA raids. And the fact, as I said to Ian in the World of Warcraft Q&A at BlizzCon, which by the way I hosted, I don't know if you remember that, but it's a real shame and it's a tragedy that you've got these brilliant raids, and Zara-Lore deserves to be remembered as one of the all-time great raids. Like, it was brave, it was imaginative, it was unique, but I feel like people probably played it a lot less than they played other raids in previous expansions purely because of the lack of tier sets. And they tried to do something about that in the 8.3 raid by having the last 2 bosses drop gear, which was 10 item levels ahead of anything else you can get in the game. And that's good. That's something. That's something. It's not tier sets, but it's something. And Ian said that we're not going to get tier sets back in Shadowlands. So, and by tier sets, I mean 2 and 4 pieces. Like the right. Cosmetic element of tier sets is nice as well, but I feel like for me a more important part is the cool like rotation changing most of the time effects that you get from tier sets.
Yeah, like it's another thing that's been kind of made. I hesitate to use the word generic, but I can't think of a better one across things like corrupted gear and whatnot. As much as I like corrupted gear, but like getting these interesting effects, it's and essences for that matter. It just it doesn't feel the same as tier set bonuses.
No, because it gives you less reason to go into the raid and to kill specific bosses in the raid and hope for specific loot drops. Because that was part of the magic as well. It's like, I need the gloves from this boss. And like, if it's not a tier piece, then okay, these might be my best gloves in this raid, but I might get lucky in my Mythic Plus chest and get some even better gloves. So whatever. But when there's a tier piece involved, that is the most desirable gear in the game, is tier piece gear from raids, and it makes raiding more exciting because it feels like the top level of play in the game as a result.
It's part of my my grocery list of gear that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, very much so. And like they've said that there won't be tier sets in Shadowlands, but I would expect to see mini tier sets in Shadowlands, because we've had those in BFA, and I think those will be a much bigger thing in Shadowlands. I think there will be 2 and 3 piece sets that you can collect rather than 6-piece sets in both dungeons and raids. You know how you've got like the Waycrest signet and trinket that kind of like interplay really well too. I think we'll see much more of that in Shadowlands.
I hope so.
I hope so too, because I think that kind of stuff is really cool. And I hope that we see spec-specific things. I don't think there's anything wrong with having like just a random 3-piece set that like rogues can get that, you know, no one else can. And so, it does something for them, which is really cool.
So to start to wrap up raiding, would you say that your criticisms of BFA raids lie more in the gearing and the progression of gear through the raid than the raids themselves?
Yes. Just the lack of that tier set element, I would say. Obviously, everything's thrown out of kilter again once you introduce Azerite armor, which is like the big sword of Damocles that hangs over most of these topics.
Yes.
It being the thing that really is the thing that's wrong with the expansion at the heart of it all. And affects so much else around it, so that a lot of the time we make the mistake of thinking that one of these things around it is the problem, but actually you can kind of trace it all back to Azerite armor. Same with tier sets. Like, the reason there aren't tier sets in this expansion is because that's what Azerite armor was supposed to do. You've got a neck piece which is already taken. You've got a headpiece which is already taken. You've got a chest piece which is already taken. And you've got shoulders which are already taken. Those are prime tier set slots which are taken up with Azerite armor the whole time. So that's literally why they didn't. Their stated reason why they didn't have like tier sets and tier set bonuses in raids this expansion. So I mean, again, you can trace that particular problem back to Azerite armor, and that's the specter looming over much of what I think is wrong. I mean, you could even say that it's the reason why the scheduling, like I mentioned as being the second worst thing about the expansion, you could even make a case for it being the reason why the scheduling wasn't as good. Like, I think it really is the heart of all the problems in BFA. And that's a real shame. And I guess we'll talk about it next week.
We will. We're going to have to. We're going to have to, because it's just, we're not fitting all this in, which listeners at home, to let you know how prep for this episode went, was Taliesin and I going, you think we can fit in this one episode? Yeah. And me going,
I sat here.
That is overly optimistic.
And Garrett was like, I feel like this is a 2-parter. And I was like, nah, mate. Nah, think big, bro. We're doing it. We're doing it all in one go. Easy game. Easy. What? You got 4 bullet points here? 5 bullet points. Easy game.
Nope. And we made it through 2.
Yeah.
We made it through 2 bullet points.
Kind of 3, maybe. Yeah, maybe 3.
We tapped on the story Azerite a little bit, but not too much. I think Warfronts and Islands will go quickly. That's my thought.
God, I hope so.
For part 2. That was my hope for Warfronts and Islands when I started playing them. I was like, I hope these go quickly.
Yeah, me too. I hope this goes quickly.
Well,
what even is it?
Well, wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our BFA Postmortem. We hope you enjoyed it. We have an email if you would like to write in, be a part of the show. wowkillercast@gmail.com is how you can be a part of the show for when we do our mailbag episodes, or if we ever miraculously have an episode that is shorter than 90 minutes and need to fill time, we'll pull an email in. But yeah, other than that, go check out. We have a YouTube channel. If you want to see our smiling faces, you can go to youtube.com/wowkiller to get the podcast in video form. And other than that, we are available everywhere you get your podcasts. So go and subscribe. But if somehow WoW fans out there, Taliesin, are not aware of where they can find you when you're not doing this podcast, where is it?
At the moment, it's locked in my house under lockdown with the rest of the country. But online, you can find us at Taliesin and Evertel on YouTube for videos, and Taliesin and Evertel on Twitch for streams. And also Taliesin and Evertel on Twitter for tweets. That's where you can find us.
Wonderful. I'm Garrett
on myriad forms.
What was that?
In what myriad forms.
There you go. I am Garrett Art on Twitter. You can find me over there. amove.tv is where you can find this and all of the other podcasts that I produce. If you are even remotely interested in the insane avalanche of Hearthstone news that fell upon us yesterday, may I point you to the 3-hour episode of The Angry Chicken that got posted just last night. We cover it all of it. So go give it a listen. The Angry Chicken podcast, found wherever podcasts are found. And that's going to bring it to the end. We'd like to thank Andrew Allen for our outro music. You should go check out his work over at andrewallenmusic.com. If you're watching on video or on live, you're not hearing it. But podcast listeners, you're unaware of the fact that I don't do this live. So anyways, that brings us to the end of this episode of WoW Killer. We will be back next week with BFA Postmortem Part 2. But until then, good luck and have fun, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.